Welcome to our channel. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring more stories like this to you.
Witness in the alley. Lily Petrova murmured a wordless melody, a fragile echo of her grandmother's lullaby's sunlight, diced by the city's concrete cliffs, painted the alley's grimy brickwork with stark, geometric designs. She hesitated, charcoal poised above her pad. The interplay of brightness and gloom was remarkable, elevating the ordinary to the compelling that a rusting bicycle wheel, abandoned against an overflowing skip, caught the sun's rays like a tarnished diadem. Right. She set to work, her hand flowing across. The page, the stench of stale ale and damp stone permeated the air. A familiar London miasma largely ignored, engrossed in detail, capturing the brick's rough texture, the fractured brilliance from a discarded bottle. She was startled by a low engine thrum that a sedan, black as night and gleaming against the dilapidated setting, sat idling at the alley's mouth that Lily's brow furrowed, a cold prickle climbing her spine. This passage offered no through route. It was a cul-de-sac. The car's mirrored windows revealed nothing. Two men unfolded themselves from the vehicle. Their movements possessed a chilling economy. Their bespoke suits sharp and menacing. One was a towering figure, his features obscured by a fedora's shadow. The other, shorter and wiry, sported a brutal scar cleaving his left cheek. Lily's breath caught. Something felt profoundly wrong. That a third man, disheveled and plainly petrified, was hauled from the back seat. That he stumbled, his desperate entreaties smothered, before being slammed against the brick wall. His gaze, brimming with abject terror, snagged on Lily's for a heartbeat. She froze, fear paralyzing her. He formed a single, silent plea. Help! The taller man produced a pistol, fitted with a silencer. The report, when it came, was a muted cough, swallowed by the tight confines of the alley. The captive slumped, his form sliding down the brick, leaving a crimson streak in its trail. That Lily's world tilted on its axis. The sketchpad escaped her nerveless grasp, landing with a quiet rustle. Her mind balked at processing the scene. The sheer callousness, the glacial indifference in the killer's eyes. A vision ripped from a nightmare. She didn't cry out. Shock had stolen her voice, leaving her mute and trapped in a horrifying tableau. The two men pivoted, their eyes raking the alley, searching. The tall one, his gaze predatory and cruel, snagged on Lily. Time stretched, elastic and slow. She registered the glint of awareness in his gaze, the comprehension that she was a witness. He raised the pistol, its dark maw fixing on her. Instinct detonated. Lily whirled and bolted, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. Thought gave way to action. She ran, her feet hammering on the broken pavement. The dead man's image burned into her memory. The alley seemed to lengthen, a labyrinth of shadow and decay. She risked a glance back. The pair pursued her, their footfalls echoing relentlessly in her wake. She erupted from the alley's mouth and onto a vibrant street. A chaotic swirl of faces and sounds. The anonymity of the crowd offered the thinnest shield, but she knew its protection was fleeting. She plunged into the throng, dodging shoppers and tourists, her breath a ragged rasp. Escape was paramount. She needed to vanish. The gun's image, the vacant eyes of the man she'd seen murdered, propelled her desperate flight at a small carpentry, its window showcasing lovingly crafted wooden toys and carved signs, beckoned as a temporary sanctuary. Impulsively, she darted inside, the bell above the door chiming a brief, discordant welcome. The fragrance of sawdust and varnish saturated the air, a comforting balm against the metallic tang of fear coating her. Tongued at a man stood at a workbench, back turned, meticulously sanding a piece of wood, tall and broad-shouldered. His movements were precise, deliberate. Jake. Lily sagged against the door, her body vibrating uncontrollably, speechless, breathless. The world dissolved around her. Jake ceased sanding, a subtle shift in his posture signaling his awareness of her presence. He didn't immediately turn. He sensed disruption, a break in the street's familiar rhythm. He felt it in the floor's faint tremor, in the sudden quiet blanketing his shop. "Everything all right, love?" he asked, his tone even. Calm. Lily's voice emerged at last, a thread-like whisper, laced with terror. I saw something. In the alley." Jake turned slowly, his gaze taking in her bleached complexion, Her wide, haunted eyes, he registered the stark fear etched into her features. The tremor in her hands, he needed no further explanation, he recognized. With a certainty that settled like lead in his stomach, that she was in trouble, deep trouble, he saw the shade of death clinging to her. A darkness he knew too well. "Breathe deep," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Tell me what you saw." But before Lily could speak, the black sedan shrieked to a halt outside his shop. The sudden violence of its arrival, the blatant disregard for the surrounding traffic, unleashed a fresh wave of panic in Lily. She gasped, her eyes widening in stark dread. They had found her. Jake's eyes narrowed. He saw the car, the figures lurking within. He understood, in that instant, that his quiet London life had just pivoted onto a dangerous new course. He looked back at Lily, her face a stark canvas of terror. He knew he couldn't allow them to reach her. Not within his sanctuary. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice taking an edge. "Stay behind me." The carpenter's code. The familiar aroma of sawdust and oil paint usually settled Jake's frayed nerves, a soothing counterpoint to the tempest within. But tonight, an undercurrent of dread tainted the air. He'd been lost in the labor of restoring an old oak tabletop when a subtle vibration, a precursor to violence he knew all too well, snagged his attention. She was a frail silhouette in the doorway, like a fledgling caught in a hurricane, barely 20. Her eyes flickered with the raw terror of a cornered animal. Rain slicked her dark hair against a face startlingly pale. He recognized the brand, the hunted. He stilled his sanding. The abrasive sound dying abruptly, she recoiled with measured movements. He addressed her. "We're closed," he stated, his voice a gravelly rumble honed by years of solitude. She gulped, the movement pronounced in her slender throat. I need help," she breathed, her accent thick and unfamiliar. Jake remained fixed, his gaze unwavering, noting the spreading dampness on the floor, the desperate grip on a worn handbag. He wasn't naive. This was no simple request for directions. Trouble had a way of finding him. He inclined his head towards a stool tucked beneath the workbench. "Come in. Get out of the downpour." Hesitation warred with urgency in her expression. Finally, she edged inside, each step tentative, as though testing the integrity of the floorboards that he watched. His mind already mapping escape routes, assessing threats once seated. He moved to the rear of the shop, returning with a heavy, woolen blanket which he wordlessly extended. Her fingers, brushing his calloused hand as she accepted it, sent a startling pulse through him, an echo of protectiveness long dormant. "Thank you," she whispered, cocooning herself in the blanket. The shivering subsided, but not the haunted look in her eyes. That he waited, allowing the silence to thicken, knowing she'd speak only when she felt marginally safer. Leaning against the workbench, arms crossed, he stood as a silent guardian at last. She broke the quiet, her voice still tremulous. "I saw something, a terrible thing." He nodded, his expression unchanged. "What did you see?" "A man. He murdered someone that I in the alley behind the Tsar bar." Her voice fractured. I ran. The Tsar bar, a Russian enclave. The situation was escalating beyond a simple plea for help. He knew the caliber of men who frequented that establishment. Men unbound by laws, relentless in their pursuit. "Did they see you?" She nodded, tears brimming. "I think so. Lily Petrova." He processed the name, letting it settle. Lily Petrova, witness. Target. He pushed away from the workbench. His boots landing softly on the wooden floor, he crossed towards the massive steel door at the back, the portal to his private quarters. Turning back to her, he paused. "Come with me." Confusion clouded her features. "Where are we going?" He met her gaze, his voice resolute. "Somewhere they won't find you." He knew he was crossing a threshold, inviting the darkness he'd fought to escape back into his life. But he couldn't abandon her to those wolves. He'd witnessed too much devastation, too much despair. He couldn't stand idly by it. He swung open the steel door, revealing a dimly lit passage. "I can't guarantee safety, Lily, but I can promise you this. I will keep you safe." The vow, spoken as much to himself as to her, resonated with the ghosts of his past, the faces of those he had failed to protect. Not this time. This time, he would make amends. Volkov's shadow. The crystal decanter of amber liquid trembled slightly as Volkov slammed his fist on the mahogany desk. The reports were concise, brutal. A witness, Lily, they called her, alive. He drained the glass, the fiery burn a welcome distraction from the icy fury coiling in his gut. This was unacceptable sloppiness. He'd built an empire on ruthlessness, on eliminating loose ends, and now this girl threatened to unravel it all. Find her? He rasped, his voice thick with suppressed rage. He addressed Dmitri, his second-in-command, whose face was a carefully constructed mask of obedience. Every street, every alley, every bloody crack in this city, I want her found. Alive. For now. I want to know who helped her. Who betrayed me. Dmitri nodded, his gaze unwavering. It will be done, boss. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any shout. Volkov stared out the rain-streaked window at the London skyline. A concrete jungle he considered his personal hunting ground. Make an example, he added, his voice barely a whisper. Let them know what happens when they cross Volkov. The order was a stone dropped into a still pond, the ripples spreading outwards, corrupting everything they touched. Within hours, London felt different. The usual hustle and bustle seemed muted, replaced by an undercurrent of fear. Black SUVs, their windows tinted like obsidian, prowled the streets, their occupants scanning faces with predatory intensity. Ian Shoreditch, two of Volkov's enforcers, Boris and Victor, entered a small, family-run bakery. The aroma of fresh bread and cinnamon hung heavy. In the air, a stark contrast to the cold purpose in their eyes. Boris, a mountain of a man with a face scarred from countless brawls, slammed his fist on the counter, rattling the pastries on display. Where is she? He demanded, his Russian accent thick and menacing. The baker, a small, wiry man with flour dusting his apron, stammered in response. I don't understand. Victor, leaner and quicker than Boris, circled around the counter, his eyes like those of a hawk. He grabbed the baker by the collar, lifting him off the ground. The girl. Lily. We know she was here. Tell us where she went, or things will get unpleasant. The baker, choking and terrified, pleaded his innocence. He genuinely didn't know. Victor, sensing the truth, released him with a shove. Boris, frustrated, swept a display of gingerbread men off the counter with a guttural growl. Waste of time, he muttered. Let's move. Similar scenes played out across the city. Pubs were emptied, apartments ransacked, and whispers of Volkov and the girl spread like wildfire through the underworld. The police, initially dismissing the surge in violence as typical gangland activity, began to take notice. Reports of intimidation, assault, and petty theft flooded into Scotland Yard. Detective Inspector Davies, a seasoned officer with a weary but sharp mind, stared at the mounting evidence. Something was different this time. The incidents were too widespread, too coordinated. It wasn't a simple turf war. He felt a prickle of unease, a sense of something bigger, something darker, lurking beneath the surface. Run facial recognition on all CCTV footage from the last 48 hours. He instructed his team. Focus on areas with high Russian expatriate populations. Let's see if we can identify any known associates of Dmitry Volkov. Davies knew that directly linking anything to Volkov was a long shot. The man was a ghost, operating in the shadows, his hands always clean. But Davies had a feeling, a nagging intuition that wouldn't let him go. He just needed a thread, a single connection, to unravel the entire web. Meanwhile, Lily remained hidden, unaware of the citywide manhunt closing in around her. The rock's protection was a fragile shield against the storm that was about to break. The tension in London was palpable, a tightening knot of fear and anticipation. Volkov's shadow had fallen, and the city held its breath, unearthing the truth. The back alley reeked of sour hops and broken dreams. Jake discovered Mickey stooped near a battered dumpster, a cigarette glued to his lower lip. No greeting, just a flick of ash onto the slick, stained concrete. Didn't expect to see you crawling back here. Rock? Thought you'd scrubbed yourself clean. Jake lowered himself into a crouch, knees creaking a protest. Need a solid, Mickey. Got a situation brewing. Mickey finally glanced up. His eyes, magnified into orbs by thick lenses, blinked like a cornered badger. Solids cost, especially for ghosts from your past. Intel. On a corpse, dumped near the docks last night. Dmitry Volkov. Mickey's features tightened, his lips thinning into a hard line. He ground the cigarette, but under his worn heel. Volkov, huh? Playing with matches, rock? Even for your brand. Just the basics, Mickey. What do you know? Jake kept his tone even. A low thrum. Mickey hesitated, then leaned close, his breath stale. Volkov was connected to deeply. Wasn't just some unlucky stevedore. He was a canary, singing to unseen ears, feeding whispers to those with the deep pockets. Whispers about what? The Kostava Bratva. Their London hustle. Money laundering, mostly. Funneling cash through paper mills, the usual song and dance. Volkov held the playbook, the contacts list. He was about to detonate the whole damn thing. Mickey spat a brown stream onto the ground. Should have had the sense to know his place. A chill settled into Jake's marrow. Lily? If Volkov was their informant, she was a lingering witness. A thread left untied. Who was he spilling to? Can't say for certain. Some city slicker, I reckon. Someone with a fat wallet and a vendetta against the Bratva. But they won't be celebrating Volkov's silence. They'll be digging to find out who and why. Jake straightened, his joints popping like firecrackers. Thanks, Mickey. You've been invaluable. He peeled off a few crumpled bills and passed them over. Mickey palmed the cash with ingrained ease. Tread lightly, rock. This ain't a brawl in a pub. This is a whole new ball game. Jake retreated, the alley seeming to shrink around him. The heavens opened in a frigid, relentless drizzle that echoed the dread coiling in his gut. He pictured Lily, holed up in that supposed sanctuary, her eyes brimming with terror. He believed he was shielding a scared kid. Now he grasped that he was guarding a vital piece in a lethal conspiracy. He pulled out his phone, punching in a long dormant number. IT rang 3 times before a gravelly voice rasped. Yeah, it's Jake Ronson. A beat of silence. Jake Ronson? What the hell? I need a hand. Need you to pull up information on a name. Lily Petrova. Anything you can find. Anything at all. That's all you got. A name? That's all I have. Just find her. Find her now. He hung up, the phone heavy as lead in his palm. The rain intensified, slicking his hair to his scalp. He had to get back to Lily, move her someplace safer. The safe house was compromised, dangerously so. He'd miscalculated the Bratva's reach. He'd underestimated everything. This wasn't merely about one dead man. It concerned fortunes, power dynasties, a merciless entity that wouldn't hesitate to obliterate anyone who posed a threat. And Lily. Lily stood squarely in their crosshairs. He sprinted. The city lights dissolving into streaks of gold and silver. He couldn't allow them to reach her. He wouldn't allow it. He'd made an oath. Workshop siege. The screech of tires ripped through the afternoon quiet. Jake's head snapped up from the engine block he was wrestling with. A thin sheen of oil already gleaming on his forehead. Before he could react, the workshop door. A thick sheet of steel he'd reinforced himself, buckled inward with a monstrous groan. 3 men piled through the splintered opening, dark suits straining across their broad shoulders. The lead man, face like chipped granite, barked in guttural Russian. Where is she? Jake's grip tightened on the wrench in his hand. Lily. He glanced towards the back room, the makeshift living space he'd rigged up for her. He could hear her muffled gasp. This is a place of business, Jake said, his voice low. Gravelly, he stepped between the men and the back room door. You're disturbing the peace. Granite Face sneered, flicking a hand. The 2 men behind him surged forward. Jake sidestepped the first, the wrench whistling through the IT connected with a sickening thud against the man's temple, sending him crumpling to the concrete floor. The second man lunged, a glint of steel in his hand. Jake dropped the wrench and met the attack head-on, deflecting the knife with his forearm and slamming his fist into the man's sternum. The air whooshed from his lungs and he stumbled back, clutching his chest. Granite Face didn't flinch. He pulled a silenced pistol from his jacket. Last chance, Ronson? Where is Petrova? Jake's eyes flickered to the shadows of the back room, where he knew Lily was huddled, terrified. He tensed, every muscle coiled. She's not here. The pistol coughed. The bullet whizzed past Jake's ear, embedding itself in the toolbox behind him. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed a can of brake cleaner from a nearby shelf and hurled it. Granite Face ducked, cursing. The can exploded against the wall in a cloud of acrid fumes. Jake used the distraction to vault over a workbench, scattering tools and spare parts. He grabbed a heavy chain hanging from the ceiling, the kind used for lifting engines. He swung it like a flail, the heavy links whistling. Through the air, Granite Face scrambled to his feet, firing again. The bullet tore through Jake's jacket. A burning sting across his ribs. He ignored it, focusing on his target. The chain connected with Granite Face's arm, shattering the bone. He screamed, dropping the pistol. The first man was groaning, trying to push himself up. Jake kicked the wrench away from him, then turned his attention to the man clutching his chest. He wasn't moving. Granite Face, cradling his broken arm, scrambled backwards, towards the shattered doorway. "You haven't seen the last of us, Ronson?" he snarled, before disappearing into the twilight. Jake stood there, chest heaving, the scent of oil, brake cleaner, and gunpowder thick in the air. He checked the man on the floor, confirming that he was merely unconscious. He was aware of a trickle of blood running down his side. He turned towards the back room. "Lily?" The door creaked open and she emerged, pale and trembling. Her eyes were wide with shock and fear. She stared at him, at the blood staining his shirt, at the wreckage of the workshop. "Jake!" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What was that?" He took a step towards her, his face grim. "They came for you." She flinched, taking a step back. Who were they? What did they want? He didn't answer immediately. He needed to assess the damage. Make sure they were safe. At least for now. He reached out, his hand hovering hesitantly. "Are you all right?" She nodded slowly, but her gaze was fixed on the blood seeping through his jacket. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the fabric. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he said, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. He knew it was more than nothing, but he couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. Lily looked around the workshop at the overturned benches, the scattered tools, the unconscious man on the floor. The scene was a stark contrast to the quiet sanctuary he had created. Fear warred with something else in her eyes, a dawning understanding of the danger she was in, and the man who was protecting her. "Jake," she said, her voice stronger now, a hint of steel in her tone. "What do we do now?" The hacker's haven. Rain lashed against the corrugated iron roof, a relentless drumming that amplified Jake's unease. He'd traded the relative safety of the backstreets for this. A disused railway arch tucked deep beneath the tangle of tracks near Waterloo. Lily huddled beside him, shivering, though whether from the cold or fear, he couldn't tell. He knocked, a prearranged rhythm, on the steel door, the sound swallowed by the storm. A moment later, a peephole slid open, revealing a single, sharp brown eye. "Password," a voice, laced with suspicion, demanded. "The rook takes queen," Jake rumbled, the phrase feeling absurdly theatrical on his tongue. The door swung inward, revealing Sarah Chun, bathed in the neon glow spilling from within. She was a whirlwind of tangled black hair, oversized glasses perched on her nose, and a cynical smirk that seemed permanently etched on her face. "Took you long enough?" she said, stepping aside. "And you brought company. Excellent. More witnesses when this whole thing blows up in our faces." The arch was a chaotic symphony of wires, screens, and half-eaten takeout containers. 3 monitors flickered with lines of code, casting an eerie light on the exposed brick walls. It smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Lily's eyes widened, taking it all in. "Make yourselves at home?" Sarah said, gesturing vaguely with a half-eaten bag of chips. "Ronson, you look like you've been through a meat grinder." "Spill." Jake kept it brief, outlining the attack, the escape, and the gnawing feeling that they were running out of time. He omitted the details about the tattoo. "That was for later." Sarah listened, her expression hardening with each word. "Volkov," she spat the name like a curse. "That slimeball. Always suspected he was more than just a businessman. He wants Lily." Jake finished, his voice flat. Sarah turned her gaze on Lily, assessing her with a clinical detachment that made Jake instinctively bristle. And why, pray tell, is this delicate flower worth risking my neck for? Lily flinched, but stood her ground. I saw something. Something I shouldn't have. Something juicy enough to get you marked for death. Huh? Sarah muttered, turning back to her screens. She tapped furiously at the keyboard, lines of code scrolling past at dizzying speed. All right, I'm in that. Let's see what Volkov's been hiding in his digital sock drawer. Hours blurred. The rain continued its relentless assault. Sarah, fueled by caffeine and righteous anger, navigated the labyrinthine pathways of Volkov's network. Jake watched, his own skills limited to the physical realm, but his instincts screaming that they were closing in on something. Lily sat quietly in the corner, a fragile presence in the digital warzone. Finally, Sarah stopped typing, a low whistle escaping her lips. Bingo, she said, her voice tight with suppressed excitement. He's got a dedicated server, tucked away in some offshore data center. Heavy encryption, but nothing I can't crack. Hold tight. The room fell silent save for the rhythmic clicking of the keyboard. The atmosphere thickened with anticipation. On the central monitor, a progress bar inched forward, agonizingly slow. Jake felt a knot forming in his stomach. Whatever was on that server was the key to stopping Volkov and saving Lily. The progress bar hit 100%. Sarah leaned back, cracking her knuckles. All right, let's see what we've got. The screen flickered, displaying a folder structure. Sarah navigated through it with practiced ease, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Suddenly, she stopped, her eyes widening behind her glasses. Oh, this is good, she breathed, her voice laced with a dangerous glee. Real good. Looks like our friend Volkov isn't just running protection rackets. He's got his fingers in everything. Arms trafficking, money laundering, even human trafficking. And he's got the documentation to prove it. She highlighted a file, its name innocuous, Project Nightingale. This, she said, is where things get interesting. She double-clicked, and a document opened, filled with names, dates, and locations. Jake recognized several politicians and prominent businessmen. Volkov's been building a nice little nest egg, Sarah said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Using the city as his personal playground, and she zoomed in on a particular line. Look who's involved, Dmitry Serebryakov. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Serebryakov had a name synonymous with corruption and brutality, a powerful figure in the Russian government. Volkov wasn't just a local gangster. He was connected to something much bigger, much more dangerous. Sarah looked up, her eyes meeting Jake's. Looks like you stumbled onto something big, Ronson, something that could bring the whole damn house down. She paused, a grim smile playing on her lips. And I think I know just how to use it. City of Hunters. The news hit London like a shockwave that IT wasn't on the BBC, or in the papers that IT was whispered. A crawling dread that seeped through the city's underbelly. Volkov, the whisper said, had put a price on their heads. Jake and Lily. Jake felt it first, a prickling unease at the back of his neck as he navigated the crowded market in Borough. The air, thick with the aroma of spices and roasting meat, suddenly felt suffocating. Eyes lingered a beat too long. Faces turned away a fraction too quickly. He pulled Lily closer, his hand a heavy weight on her shoulder. Something's wrong, she murmured, her own apprehension mirroring his. He nodded, scanning the throng. We need to move. They ducked into a narrow alleyway, the sounds of the market fading behind them. Jake pulled out his burner phone, his thumb hovering over Sarah's contact. Trust was a luxury they could no longer afford, but Sarah was all they had left. The phone rang twice before she answered, her voice tight. I know, Rock. It's everywhere that he's offering a fortune. Enough to make even saints consider selling you out. How bad? Jake asked, his voice a low growl. Think every two-bit thug, every desperate gambler, every bored rich kid looking for a thrill. London's become a hunting ground. Sarah paused, the hum of her computer a constant backdrop. I've scrubbed your digital footprint as much as I can. But you need to stay off the grid. Cash only, No calls unless absolutely necessary. And find somewhere safe, somewhere I can't track. Impossible, Jake muttered. Not impossible. Difficult. Think old school, rock. Think pre-internet. He hung up, the weight of her words settling on him. He looked at Lily, her face pale in the dim light. We're off the map. For a while. Their safe house, a dingy flat in Bethnal Green, was no longer safe as they packed a meager bag. A brick shattered the window, showering them with glass. Jake reacted instantly, shoving Lily behind a crumbling wall. He peered through the jagged opening point. Two figures in hoodies, faces obscured, were scrambling back into a waiting van. They know, Lily whispered, her voice trembling. They're guessing, Jake corrected, but the truth hung heavy in the air. Word was spreading like wildfire. They fled into the labyrinthine streets of East London. Every face was a potential threat. The news vendor who usually gave Jake a nod, now stared with a calculating glint in his eye. The old woman feeding pigeons in the square seemed to watch them with unnerving intensity. They sought refuge in a derelict warehouse on the Isle of Dogs, the air thick with the smell of damp and decay. It was a temporary haven, at best. Jake spent the night watching, his senses on high alert. Lily tried to sleep, but the city outside felt alive, a predator circling its prey at dawn. Jake went out to find food. He trusted no one. He paid cash for a loaf of bread and some fruit, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings as he turned a corner. He walked straight into a man he vaguely recognized, a low-level enforcer from a rival gang. The man's eyes widened, a mixture of fear and greed flashing across his face. Rock, he stammered. I didn't know it was you. Jake knew what was coming. The man was already reaching for his phone. He moved faster. A swift punch to the throat silenced the enforcer, sending him crumpling to the ground. Jake took the phone, smashed it under his heel, and disappeared back into the maze of streets, the taste of betrayal bitter on his tongue. London, once a familiar landscape, had become a deadly game of cat and mouse, and the hunters were closing in. Canary Wharf assault. The Volkov Tower's glass skin caught the harsh yellow wash of Canary Wharf streetlights. Jake visualized Sarah's blueprint, a phantasmal overlay on reality. He slipped past the initial security, using a dead employee's access card filched by Sarah. Inside, the atmosphere thrummed with corrupt finance and latent threat. He flowed through the corridors. A phantom in the recesses. Sarah's voice, a digital whisper. Blind spot at 10. Thermals above the vents. Pressure triggers by the elevators. Watch your step. He obeyed, senses heightened. He reached the service elevator, forcing the doors just enough to squeeze through. A quick override sent the car soaring to the 30th floor, Volkov's personal domain. The ascent was a hushed prelude. The doors parted onto a hallway dripping with opulent decor. Two guards, colossal and impassive, stood watch. Lost, buddy? One rumbled, hand hovering near his weapon. Jake didn't reply. He struck out a burst of motion, a precisely applied pressure point. The guard slumped, unconscious. Before the other could react, Jake's elbow slammed into his jaw, sending him sprawling into a display of delicate Murano glass. Sarah, Jake murmured, voice a gritty whisper. Security compromised. Level 30. Copy that, she returned, her tone taut. Heads up, Rock. Expect company. He advanced, each footfall deliberate. 3 hulking figures appeared from a side passage. Weapons raised, Jake dived behind a marble pillar, the air stinging with cordite as bullets chewed chunks from the stone. He answered with controlled bursts, eliminating the point man. The others scrambled for cover. He couldn't sustain a drawn-out fight. Volkov was the target. A quick peek revealed a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. Inspiration flared. He ripped it free, unleashing a blinding cloud of foam. The sudden sensory overload disoriented the remaining guards. Jake exploited the confusion, disarming them with swift, brutal efficiency, leaving them gasping amidst the white residue. He reached Volkov's office, a massive mahogany barrier reinforced with steel. He booted it open, the crash echoing like a declaration of war. Volkov sat behind a vast desk, amber liquid swirling in a glass. Lily Petrova was perched stiffly in a chair, her eyes wide with raw fear. Volkov's expression was blank. Yet his eyes held a predatory gleam. "The Rock," Volkov purred, his voice silken. "I anticipated your arrival. Please enter. Make yourself comfortable." He gestured with the hand holding the glass. "Release her, Volkov," Jake stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "I want the data." Volkov chuckled. A low, rumbling sound. "Data? A curious term that I prefer. Insurance. And I rarely relinquish my insurance. Not without a cost." He sipped his drink. "Miss Petrova here possesses valuable insights. She witnessed something regrettable, something potentially damaging to my enterprise. She doesn't deserve this." Jake's glance flickered towards Lily, seeing the terror mirrored in her gaze. "Deserve? A quaint notion." Volkov arched an eyebrow. "Irrelevant, in fact. This is business, Mr. Ronson. Power and control are the only currencies." He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto Jake's. "You believe you can wrest them from me? Here, within my sanctuary." Suddenly, more enforcers stepped from a hidden portal in the wall, weapons leveled. The room shrank, the tension thickening like tar. Jake was cornered. "Last chance. Rock," Volkov sneered, his voice laced with menace. "Withdraw. Perhaps I shall consider a gesture of leniency." Jake stood firm, eyes narrowed to slits. "Not a chance, Volkov. Justice carved in wood." The warehouse air reeked of spent cartridges and the coppery stench of spilled blood. Volkov, a blossoming stain marring his once immaculate shirt, spat a curse, the sound guttural and raw. He cradled his ribs. A souvenir from Jake's expertly placed elbow point. Two of his thugs were sprawled amidst the scattered debris, limbs contorted in grotesque angles. "You underestimate me," Volkov wheezed, his accent a weapon in itself. He produced a pistol, the cold metal glinting under the unforgiving glare of the overhead lights. Jake remained unmoved, knuckles aching that he'd sought to avoid this confrontation. As always, Volkov, however, had left him with no alternative. "It ends here, Volkov." The weapon coughed, the projectile whining past Jake's temple. Years spent navigating the city's underbelly had sharpened his instincts to a fine edge that he flowed forward, a whirlwind of calculated force, closing the gap before Volkov could recover. A snap kick sent the pistol spinning across the concrete, followed by a thunderous right that connected squarely with Volkov's jaw. The man's bulk collapsed like a felled tree. Lily, pressed against a wall of stacked crates, eyes wide and haunted, seized her opportunity. While Jake kept the prone Volkov pinned, she darted forward, locating the satchel Sarah had pinpointed, the repository of the encrypted hard drive. A tremor ran through her as she clutched it. "Jake!" she whispered, her voice fragile. "I've got it." Abruptly, a figure stumbled from the dim recesses of the warehouse. Another of Volkov's crew. One Jake believed neutralized, he brandished a length of corroded pipe. Aiming its blunt end at Lily, time seemed to distill to a viscous crawl. Jake roared. A primal sound ripped from his core. He launched himself forward, intercepting the blow aimed at Lily. The pipe crashed against his shoulder, a numbing impact that sent a searing wave through his arm. He disregarded the pain. He disarmed the assailant. With brutal efficiency, delivering a precise, silencing blow to the windpipe. "Lily, get to the car," Jake directed, his voice strained. "Sarah's waiting." Clutching the satchel as though it were salvation, Lily didn't hesitate. She bolted through the warehouse doors, disappearing into the inky canvas of the London night. Jake finished securing the remaining threats, ensuring they posed no further danger to Lily. Sarah was a woman of her word. Her battered Ford Escort idled, its headlamps slicing through the gloom. Lily hurled herself inside, slamming the door. "Drive! Now!" Sarah needed no further prompting. The tires shrieked as she rocketed out of the parking lot, leaving the warehouse and its secrets behind. Inside, sirens echoed in the distance, drawing nearer. Jake knew his window was shrinking. He hauled Volkov, dazed but regaining consciousness, toward the entrance. The first police cruiser skidded to a halt, officers erupting from the vehicle, weapons trained. "He's all yours," Jake declared, shoving Volkov into their path. "And the evidence is in the satchel. The girl has it. Everything's there." He then dissolved into the shadows, vanishing before the officers could react. The subsequent days unfolded in a whirlwind. Scotland Yard, armed with the data extracted from the drive, struck with swift precision. Volkov's empire crumbled, its tendrils of corruption exposed. Shell companies were dismantled, illicit funds seized, compromised officials apprehended. Lily, understandably shaken, was placed under the protection of the state. A brief, coded message from Sarah reached Jake. She's safe. New name, clean slate. He asked for nothing more. Knowing she had a future was enough, he sought refuge in his workshop. The aroma of seasoned wood and sawdust a welcome salve to his battered spirit. The steady whisper of the plane against the oak, the resolute thud of the mallet, the tactile bond with the material. It centered him, reeled him back from the precipice. He initiated a new endeavor. A rocking horse destined for a local orphanage. The flowing lines, the gentle rhythm, the promise of unadulterated joy. It was a concrete manifestation of the good he had accomplished, a sharp counterpoint to the brutality he had been forced to inflict as he sculpted the horse's head, imbuing it with kind features. He thought of Lily, he wished her serenity, that she might finally find slumber free from nightmares, that she could shed the darkness she'd endured and bask in the light of her fresh start. The rocking horse emerged, a wooden testament to resilience and nascent hope. Justice, rendered in carved oak.